Let's talk about everybody's favorite topic, NBA TV ratings.
Yeah.
Uh,
Right.
they
Well,
are.
that's what we're here
It's
for.
been. It does seem like it crops up anecdotally, like once or twice a year. That this ratings thing, or the way the game is played, or why it's not generating more interest. I think it's a more nuanced discussion than people. They try to boil it down to 3-point attempts or why people aren't watching or certain mediums. I'm just curious your thoughts, Grant. It's out there. I'm not even going to cite a specific source. It is everywhere,
Right.
including, before I throw it to you, from the league's media partners that are just like out there talking about this in a weird, they talk about the NBA in a weird light. So I'm just curious, where are you at with this discourse over not just NBA ratings, but the state of the NBA game and overall interest in it?
So to take the ratings thing first, I think I guess I just wonder at a threshold level, like, is this actually a concern? I guess, and to your point, like, yes, it is a topic of discussion. With what percentage of NBA fans and the audience is it actually something they've thought about, right? Like, because we're in the silo, right? We're in the echo chamber now. Like the commissioner's talking about it, but it's like, what out of every 10 NBA fans that watch a handful of games every year, like, do 9 of them like not even know that ratings are being discussed? Like, do they like I think what we do sometimes is we have an amplification problem. Like, that's true of like one of the core problems of social media and all this other stuff is like every opinion gets treated like it's equally loud and it can get amplified depending on what silo or echo chamber you're in. So like, I don't know that the ratings thing is as big a deal as it's like Adam Silver like shouldn't have to talk about it. I don't think, or if he does, he should, like, anyone that says, "Oh, the ratings thing is a problem. It's bad for the league. Nobody's watching anymore." It's like my shutdown of that would just be some version of like, "Yeah, you're right. The biggest media companies in the world who have all the resources and incentives and motivation to figure out what the NBA is worth were wrong to spend tens of billions of dollars to have the rights to broadcast to stream it going forward." Like, you're correct. Ratings are a problem. All these multi-billion dollar companies that just spent a lot on it are wrong. Like, I just think, like, isn't that dispositive of the issue? Like, doesn't any talk about TV ratings just stop mattering when the league just signed the biggest TV deal the biggest rights deal it ever has? Like, clearly these companies have information that suggests to them there's enough growth potential and it's popular enough to spend all this money on. Like, why are we still talking about this?
Yeah, I honestly don't know, especially in the aftermath. Leading up to it, okay, sure. But
Sure.
the people that have predicted, and I saw these predictions, by the way, before the last TV deal was signed, that the NBA is not going to be a league in 10 years or something.
It happens
There
all the
are,
time.
I do think one of the problems is, and I won't speak for you, I'm probably guilty of this too, of being too dismissive to people that have these counter opinions, probably because I'm tired of hearing them. So
Yeah.
if people have them and they're fans, like, who I just don't know fans that are actually care about ratings. Like, if you're not watching, if you decided I'm not going to watch the NBA, so you're part of the ratings problem, like, why are you caring about it then? But insofar as you care, we probably need to be receptive because fans do drive the interest level in the game.
Mm-hmm.
But I just, so much of it seems disingenuous. And the thing that I struggle to wrap my head around is my second point, the way these ratings are measured. Like, what's the efficacy level of encompassing all the different forms that the way in which the games are consumed, where it's across all these different platforms? We're talking about the death of regional sports networks, basically. How are they tracking it beyond just regular television, but also the NBA? Like, how are you tracking it there? And then Amazon, of course, after going in on an NBA package, has to have other data. It's like, how are these ratings factoring in? And the other thing I wonder too is that the NBA has tried to make itself more marketable to the younger generation. And that lends itself to, I guess, a lot of highlight culture or consuming on
Mm-hmm.
social media or via YouTube. How do you track that and the interest level in that? I'm not saying there's not a problem, but I'm just saying, like, the way that everything is consumed has changed. And that I think companies understand that maybe the ratings are going down, like, relative to years past, but we live in such a different world now to the way that stuff is consumed. Whereas live sports, even if they're generating a smaller share of average viewers, like, they're still the one thing that
Yeah.
bring people together around like, I'm going to tune in at this time to watch this thing. We don't have appointment viewing television anymore. And I also think, before I throw it back to you, I don't want to hear comparisons to the NFL. The NBA doesn't have the same scarcity of product.
Right.
That every game in an NFL regular season accounts for what, 5 or 6%
It
of a
matters.
team's season? It
That's
matters so
shorthanded.
much.
It matters. Yeah.
And so if you want the NBA to shorten the season, that's an entirely different discussion.
Yeah. I think like you can be objectively right and say ratings are down if what you mean is fewer people watch full games on TV. Like that, sure, that's fewer people align on what they watch on TV just across the board. Like you just talk about, like, just think about like, I don't know, the finale of Friends got like however many, like more, it's in tens of millions in viewers, and like, I don't know, just because there were fewer things, and now everything is so dispersed that like, it just, you're never going to see that again. So like, you can be right, but if you're using that argument about the ratings to say the league has a crisis of fan interest in some regard, and then we need to look at like what's causing that, and that gets you into like, oh, homogenous offense, too many threes, all this other stuff. I don't think you can say that because conventional TV ratings are down, there is a crisis of interest. And I would just say again, like maybe I'm being naive, but I don't think you would have a bidding war that topped out at the crazy numbers it did for the rights to NBA games and content if there were a crisis of fan interest. Like, I just don't think you can make that connection. It's because you're right. Like, it's just being consumed differently. And that does not involve sitting down for 2 hours and watching a game like it used to. And that's like not at all surprising given the way that everything is consumed now, certainly compared to how it used to be. So like that does get into some of the, unless you have more to add on the ratings thing, like the state of the game stuff that LeBron is talking about, that talking heads all across the board are bringing up, and Adam Silver's talking about, like all the 3-point stuff. Like, are you, again, I think you're right to say people are saying that and do think that, so we shouldn't be totally dismissive of it. And I'm guilty of being extremely dismissive of like both the ratings and the like threes are a problem conversations, because I just disagree. But like, so if we're going to charitably engage with those arguments, like where are you on the threes thing, on the state of the game thing, and on it being like a problem we need to address?
So as you mentioned, us being in our silo, it gets difficult because when I'm watching, I don't watch any NBA games,
right,
but in my mind, when I'm dreaming, watching NBA games, yes, there are teams that are trying to take the same shots. The methods by which they get there, I don't feel like I'm seeing all this repetition, specifically across 30 teams, but let alone across, there are like even 5 to 10 teams that play exactly the same way. And I think that there are probably, maybe that's worth a podcast, like rule changes the NBA could consider, but like getting rid of the corner three as an example, just no, that would just cram up the floor so much. I'm more receptive to, should the floor be expanded so that the corner three, then we might be taking away courtside seats, but that it's longer. I can't remember who likened it to this, but do you get annoyed in the NFL that running backs are standing in a different position now than they were years ago? And that's kind of what's happening with the NBA, where it's players know to take steps back rather than in, especially if they're not dribbling with the ball or playmakers. I'm oversimplifying this. I totally understand, but the homogeny of NBA offense or NBA play style, it's non-existent.
It's wrong.
Like the shot profile, okay, threes have gone up, but like the game has changed. We have more skill than ever. Teams are built in all these different ways. And a lot of the clips you see going around are also just like garbage time, where, okay, if there's garbage time, you want to have a conversation about parity. There's also, when's the last time there was this much parity where you might say that there are 2 or 3 teams that you are tier 1 title contenders? How many tier 2 title contenders do we have right now? Or how many teams can you talk yourself into making a conference finals? There's real parity there.
Half the league, easy.
And I can't help but thinking, I have another question on this for you, but I can't help but thinking, do you think this comes down to, if you view this as a problem, are we then, because I did say we shouldn't be dismissive. There are smart people who do feel this way. The too many threes argument, for instance. I'm totally against getting rid of the corner three. I don't know where you land on that.
Okay, so before you ask the question, there's 2 points I want to hit that you brought up. The first is the offense is homogenous. Like that's not true. That's wrong. I think like I don't know if you've seen all the recent discussions about Memphis's offense, where essentially like the pick and roll took over basketball 15, 20 years ago, became ubiquitous. Everybody was running pick and rolls. And even now, like ball screens and handoffs, credit to Ben Taylor, who did an awesome video about this on Thinking Basketball. Go watch it, about the Memphis Grizzlies offense. So Memphis is running essentially like 43 pick and rolls or on ball screens and handoffs per game this year. That's like half of the league average. So Memphis is doing something that is wholly unique. Like that
Right.
their offense, Draymond Green talked about it after a couple games ago. The last time they played him, is like he's like, nobody plays like that, basically. Like they run this unique space and drive and replace and rotate offense that does not involve on ball screens. And it's like, if you're watching that and then you're watching a pick and roll heavy team and you say offense is the same because they're generating threes out of both of these, like that's absurd. Like the process is could not be more different. The end goal, because of math, is to shoot a lot of threes. And okay, cool. That's just how you optimize offense. So one, offenses are not the same. Two, if you're saying there are too many threes and we need to change the dimensions of the court or move the line back or whatever, okay, let's be receptive to that. But what is it you want to look different? Do you want there to be more long twos? Because that's what you'll get. Like that. I think that's what's going to happen.
If you move the 3-point line back, like the arc back, are you even going to get more long twos, or you're just going to get even like more dramatic spacing than you have right now?
It depends on the fix. Moving the line back might not be the best example, because I think you're right. You just would get more space, more threes, more whatever. But like, I think it was on Dunked On, they were talking about like, if you look at the historic shot frequency data, before everybody was taking a lot of threes, the percentage increase in 3-point attempts basically pulled only from long twos. What like rim attempt rates and short mid-range stuff has been pretty constant as percentage of shot attempts, but what you're trading are long twos for threes. And so like, I think you need to, if you don't like the 3-point volume, you need to make the specific suggestion that is going to result in a changed offensive landscape that is not a bunch of long twos, because you're not going to eradicate jump shots. Like, and also this is the last thing I'll say, and sorry for Discord people who were having a great discussion before we started recording. I'm just going to regurgitate. I think like if you say, this is a broader point, I guess, but we'll apply it to basketball. If you say like you liked how ball was played in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, whatever, because it wasn't just guys chucking up threes, I think you got to think pretty hard about like how old you were when your formative experience with basketball happened, because your favorite music is still from then, like your favorite movies, your favorite whatever happened between a certain age range. And that's when you were just more emotional and receptive to stuff and like codified, like, I like this. It doesn't mean it was objectively better. That's just one thing to think about when we're asking for like, I wish it was how it used to be.
That's the myth of nostalgia.
Sure, exactly. Good label to put on it. So like, I think you got to be careful when you're talking about threes being a problem with just saying that and not considering what some of the changes to limit threes would do to the product and assuming that fewer threes would make it better. I just think what you might be trading for would make the game worse potentially, because there's not really a lot of evidence to suggest that fewer threes would lead to like more wide open dunks or like good post ups or you know, I don't know that you want to. I don't know that you can engineer those types of things, and I don't know that you necessarily want to, because like watch an 80s or 90s or early 2000s game, and that's not a fun experience. It's slow. There's a bunch of guys out there that are unskilled. Like we've really made it so that every position is skillful now. So I don't know. I should stop there because I've gone for too long. But does any of that resonate with you? I just don't understand the knee jerk too many threes thing.
Right. And to back up your point. So let's go back more than 20 years to 2003, 2004, which is as far back as Cleaning the Glasses data is right now. 18.3% of all shot attempts came as 3-pointers. That number this year is 39% of all shot attempts are 3-pointers. That is that's more than double. That's a drastic difference. The rim frequency, again, in 2003, 2004, 31.5% of all shots came at the rim. This year, 32.5% of all shots come at the rim. The shots that have left, I'm just backing up your point. That like there was real data there.
Get the data, because I was being vague about it.
It was long twos. And here's the other thing, and this maybe ties into the nostalgia aspect of it, or maybe not. And this is not to, I'll speak from my own experience here. The game now, I feel like, is harder to understand because there are all these different things happen. I think offenses are generally, everyone says they're just trying to drive and kick, or they're dribbling off the floor, dribbling up the floor and shooting. They're not. Look at all the stuff that's happening away from the ball. But here's what I'm saying. That can be hard to track because the game, it's a faster paced game. It's not football. There's not all this time in between downs to break down a play. And then there's all these games that are constantly coming at you. Do you think there's anything to the effect of, and I really am promising not to say that I think anybody is stupid. That's not my point here, but that there is just an over saturation of the product on top of all these different complexities that it's easier to simplify it down to, well, the problem with the NBA is this. It's all these threes rather than, is there even time? Because look, we criticize media partners a bunch, or media partners receive a ton of criticism, and a lot of it is fair. You could talk about the game differently, but I think some people have missed the mark. And JJ Redick's been a really big advocate for this, and I agree with a lot of what he recently said, but he's also come across, and maybe we've sometimes too, of condescending of people who don't consume that exact type of content or watch the game in that way. Is the NBA, and I'm also not trying to make excuses. I'm not trying to give the NBA carte blanche and say coverage is perfect, the game is perfect, and I'm not trying to call people stupid, but do we just have this weird expectation of what the game is supposed to be, and even maybe what different types of coverage are supposed to be? Because when you have 82 games of such a, like, I don't tune into hockey, but like, are they breaking down? Like, that's a fast-paced game. Are you able to break off all the nuances of what's happening away from the puck with different players when you don't have as much time in between all these different possessions, when there are so many games coming at you? I find too much of this coming back to, I think, like the NFL being mentioned. The ratings discussion just isn't even worth mentioning there. But when it comes to, well, we've seen ESPN like cater to a certain demographic of NFL where there's this smart coverage. I agree. I'm just wondering how much that level of coverage resonates with the normal fan, when the time investment, I think, would have to be greater, because there's not as much when you're just following a team or trying to cover the whole league and there's not as much time in between games. I think it makes it harder on everyone's behalf. The fans, the medias, I think it's just a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, I think that's all right. I think, like, so I agree. I thought what JJ Redick said was mostly right about, part of the problem with this perception that the NBA is struggling with viewership, or people are criticizing style of play, has to do with, like, you don't get it. And like, the way that it's being talked about is a result of people. I'm going to be negative about this because I don't understand it. And so that's hard to not conflate with, like, that is talking down. I would say, like, well, can't we still just defer to the opinions of experts, of people like JJ Redick that understand what's happening and want to talk about it intelligently, and not knock it because, one, you don't understand it, and two, it doesn't look like the NBA that you remember best from years ago. At the same time, like, if it were true that the league was actually suffering as a result of fans not liking the product, then you can't ignore that anymore. I think, to circle all the way back, you can't convince me that the NBA is struggling because fans don't like the product. I don't think that's actually that's not a baseline truth we can start making decisions off of.
And there's also, this is my final thought on the entire matter, is, and as a super peek behind the curtain, let's look at how this podcast changed over the past few months. The amount of time we were investing in creating shorts, editing them, coming up with ideas for them, it was exponential. Now we've just punted on them. And the whole point of shorts for us, it didn't make us money. All it did was drive in new members of the audience that I don't know what the conversion was on. Are they listening to the content that Grant and I enjoy consuming if we're consuming other content, or creating the most? And we made the active decision to stop. And we're here. I want the show to grow. I think we're incredibly underrated, in my totally unbiased opinion. But yeah, I want the show to grow. But like, we have an audience built up over a period of time. Though those are the people that we want to reach, because they're the people that have been interested in us for X. And I'm not saying the NBA shouldn't want to draw in new viewership, but do you think there's something to, I'm liking it back to I shouldn't say your crazed focus on, I kind of forced you down the shorts rabbit hole for like a year, but like that focus on drawing in more and more and exponential growth. Do you think that's part of the problem here, where are we just not catering enough to the people that do enjoy the game of basketball? And that might touch upon, maybe it excuses the ratings, but it certainly touches upon like, well, then maybe there is room for a wholesale shift in coverage.
Well, it's hard to not talk about it like all as a piece now. So I would say I would be concerned if the league, as a result of believing that fan interest is dropping or not growing, if the league is convinced that fan interest is not growing because fans, broadly speaking, do not like what the product is anymore, or like too many threes, whatever criticisms are out there. If the league starts making rule changes because there is what I think is like a too vocal of a minority, or a minority that is being too loudly amplified, talking about the criticisms being made about the style or whatever. If the league makes changes to the product based on that, in the face of, I think, broader information that it is in fact growing, then that's really the problem, where you're making decisions because you're bending to like the wrong forces, I think. So like, yeah, you want to grow as a product. That's especially as with as many stakeholders as something like the NBA has, and any business of any size, you want to grow because that's just, you're growing or you're dying. But I think that's just not the way to make the best product all the time. Like, right? Like if you want to appeal to something, to a broader base, like, okay, then everybody becomes the Big Bang Theory or whatever, and you don't have like, better done TV shows that appeal to a smaller niche of fans. I don't know. I think the growth over everything model is a problem. And I would hope the NBA is smart enough. When I read Adam Silver's comments about it, like, we're thinking about these things. We're listening to these concerns about the All-Star game, for example. We're taking steps. The All-Star game is an exception because they are changing it, but that was unanimous. Everybody agreed it needed to change.
Except for the players, apparently.
Yeah. I viewed what he said as what a smart lawyer would say, which is, we're taking that under consideration. We're thinking about this. We hear you. He didn't say anything other than, we're going to look at it and make the best decisions we can. I think he realizes the game is doing great, and I need to appease people that disagree, but I'm not going to make any real changes. And so that's kind of how I took that, and that's kind of how I feel about it overall.
Do you think it's problematic, or do you just write it off as like LeBron just having a bout of hypocrisy, where he like unprompted brought up the 3-pointers the other day, that there's too many of them? And I'm not saying LeBron is right, because I think he's wrong, but like, he's also, so he wants that to change back, or there needs to be a change there. But the NBA then changed the All-Star game format, and players have shit all over it. And so it's, if LeBron specifically saying it was bad, and I think he did acknowledge, like, I guess they made change, and change isn't always good. But at the same time, like, you can't say, like, this is wrong, we need to change it, and then they try to do something to change it and immediately say it's the
and you haven't even tried it yet.
Right. By the way. But it's also the NBA Cup. We're 2 years into it. It's not going to mean anything. And maybe it flops and you can never get teams to care about it. But like, we can't just say after, like, you can't try something, give it in the NBA's lifespan, give it a millisecond, and then just, well, no, it sucks. It doesn't work. And so I just wonder, for even the people that are complaining or think that they want change, do you think that I don't know if that change is going to actually placate anyone, because then there'll be people that are mad that they made the change to placate these other people that maybe didn't like aren't watching the league as closely. So I want to be clear. I think because people are saying it, when you do have like maybe the best player of all time saying it, but then it kind of falls into the bucket of, if you view LeBron as like in quasi retirement, when you hear all these former players criticizing the game today, as LeBron just entered that phase of his existence.
That was my very first thought, is that, yeah, that's kind of what that felt like to me.
It's an issue, because I do think that there are enough, like, it's something to talk about, but it's probably the Adam Silver response is like, yeah, we're listening to it, but that doesn't mean we're going to implement changes, because I don't think the state of the game is as dire as people think. I think the thing, growth over everything, as you said. And I also just feel like we probably haven't adjusted our expectations or embraced nuance the way we should when we're talking about things such as shot distribution or ratings at a time when consumption is so decentralized, so decentralized.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to end it. Like, complaints are always going to be aired louder than like approval. I think generally speaking, that's maybe that's what we should have started with is it's not news if Steph Curry comes out and says, I kind of like how the game has evolved. It suits me. It's going well. Like, I think everybody's contracts are bigger. We're all making more money. That's cool. That's never going to get as much amplification as LeBron saying there's too many threes or Kevin Durant saying the All-Star game sucks. So that's, as a culture, that's a problem we have in general. But yeah, I just think if you don't like the game as it is, I think you're in the minority. Just that's what the numbers and the investments and the skyrocketing revenues and franchise valuations say. Everybody seems to like the product pretty well. Doesn't mean you should stop trying to make it as good as it can be, but let's just be a little more thoughtful and not quite as reactionary, and let's be more nuanced about what that means.
Let us know what you think in the comment section of that. With that, though, Mr. Hughes, you ready to take us out of here?
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Dan. Remember, if you haven't already, please rate, review, subscribe, thumbs up everything. Follow us on YouTube, subscribe there, leave some comments on the YouTube videos. Join our Discord. Links for that in the YouTube and podcast description. Tell your friends about the podcast. Tell your enemies about it. And as always, we shout out Frank Ntilikina and we apologize to Jared Allen.